Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's RUMA webinar. My name is Kat McLaughlin, and I'm the chair of RUMA Agriculture and will be chairing the session today. First things first, there's just a few bits of housekeeping. This webinar is being recorded and it will be published on the RUMA website in due course. Please can I request that you mute your microphones and turn off your cameras for the duration of the webinar. That would be really helpful, and it would help to not create any distractions. We have a lot to get through and a lot to discuss today, which means that there won't be specific time for questions from the audience. But if you do have any burning questions, please feel free to add them to the Q&A function. And if we have time, we will answer a few. The chat function has been turned off. So as I say, it's just if you have some burning questions, please add them to the Q&A function. Our webinar today is entitled Opportunities and Challenges Influencing the Responsible Use of Medicine, and is the first in a series of 4 live webinars that RUMA Agriculture is delivering throughout November. The other webinars, if you'll just indulge me to quickly share details, are the future for vaccine availability for the UK animal health market, and that's on Wednesday the 12th of November from 11 o'clock to 12:30 p.m. And in that, we'll hear the results from the vaccine availability survey that RUMA ran earlier this year. And there's also a VMD presentation and a Q&A with the VMD. The next webinar is the RUMA Agriculture Targets Task Force 2 final report and the VARS report launch. And that's Wednesday, the 19th of November from 11 o'clock to 12:30 p.m. So that will see the release of the latest VMD's VARS report, plus the release of the final report in the RUMA cycle of targets. That's the TTF2 report. And then the final webinar is the RUMA Target Task Force 3 launch. And that's Wednesday, the 26th of November from 11 a.m. until 12:30 p.m. And at that, we'll unveil details of the 3rd cycle of sector targets. We, of course, hope you can join us at all of the webinars, but if not, as I say, they will all be available to watch again on our website in due course. So back to today, and our focus is on a panel discussion on the opportunities and challenges influencing the responsible use of medicines. And I'm delighted to be joined by a fantastic panel of experts. Just by way of introduction, I would like to ask you all to introduce yourselves and who you represent, and answer the question, what the responsible use of medicines means to you and your organisation from the perspective of your role. And I think I'll kick off with Abigail Seeger from VMD.
Hi, Kat. Morning, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me to be here. I'm Abby Seeger. I'm the Chief Executive here at the Veterinary Medicines Directorate, and I have, therefore, policy and operational delivery oversight for veterinary medicines regulations and antimicrobial resistance. In relation to the question, what does responsible use of medicines mean to me? I mean, I think the word responsible is absolutely imperative, but maybe from 3 specific angles. For me, one being protecting animal health and welfare, so that medicines are used when necessary and at the right dose and under professional guidance in order to maintain high health and welfare standards. Secondly, responsible use means preserving efficacy and reducing resistance to safeguard the effectiveness of medicines for future generations. And thirdly, it's about responsible use of medicines in balancing health and environmental responsibilities, which of course is informed by good evidence. So those are the 3 aspects that I would say responsible use of medicines means for me.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Clara?
Hello, good morning, everyone, and thank you for inviting me to be part of this panel. So I'm Dr. Clara Saville. I'm the Veterinary Head of Exotic Disease at the Animal and Plant Health Agency. And I'm going to address this question from the perspective of the agency, but also from my role on the exotic disease side. So firstly, APHA plays a really important role in the prevention of disease. And that's both endemic and exotic, of course, working in partnership with farmers and others. And so that reduces the reliance on antimicrobial use by preventing disease. Secondly, APHA has a complement of national and international reference centres, including AMR Global Reference Centre, and that really highlights the expertise that we hold within APHA. And APHA conducts cutting-edge research on antimicrobial resistance, and this better equips us and others in tackling AMR and antimicrobial use. And finally, APHA undertakes AMR surveillance, working very closely, of course, with VMD. That surveillance is conducted in diseased and healthy livestock. And this is all published in the VARS report, which will be launched imminently. And that data shows an association between reducing antimicrobial use and reducing antimicrobial resistance. Thanks, Kat.
Thank you. Carl, you want to go next?
Hi, good morning, everybody. My name is Carl Dumashi-Sarras. I lead something called Health for Animals, and that's the global trade association, which brings together all of the producers of animal health products around the world. So producers of vaccines, parasite control products, antibiotic diagnostics, and all the other tools, both for livestock and for pets. We represent the largest 11 companies around the world and another 100 plus smaller companies through our national associations. And you will all know NOAA in the UK, which is our UK association. So we estimate that we represent about 85% of the total value of products produced around the world. And I'm here because I'm going to take a slightly more international perspective today, if I may, Madam Chair. To your question, what is responsible use? I think I agree with the definition that Abby gave. Product use that meets three conditions for us: use for animal welfare, so that animals are treated promptly and don't have any unnecessary suffering. When necessary, sick animals or at-risk animals, and of course with veterinary oversight. I think you said all the right words: the right product, the right dose, the right route, and the right duration. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll come to Gavin next, please.
Thanks, Kat. Morning. I'm Gavin Morris. I'm coming today with probably a few different hats on. So I'm an ex-farm vet, but I sit on the steering committee of the Food Industry Initiative on Antimicrobials, which is a grouping of retailers and food service and processors with a common aim. Sit on the governance and op group of the AHDB Medicine Hub, and I'm president of the Veterinary Public Health Association. And my sort of day job is Group Primary Technical Animal Welfare and Veterinary Manager for Dumbia Dawn Meats, which is probably one of the largest beef and sheep processors across UK and Ireland, and a very large exporter, which for us is really important. So from an FIA perspective, the FIA members, they would very happily have use of a national usage data, national usage figures. But the longer we don't have those, the more the pressure grows from the retailers and food service to require their own data. From a medicine hub perspective, Wales have been really successful in populating their own Welsh usage data on their system. Scotland are closing in, they're close behind, and Northern Ireland behind that. But there's a real concern that English ruminant data, especially beef and sheep, is lacking, despite the efforts of the Medicine Hub to provide a platform for it to go onto. EMB in pigs worked, but we're not yet there for ruminants. And then lastly, I think from a Veterinary Public Health Association perspective, that represents public health vets and particularly vets working in certification for export. And it also links very much to my day job with Dumbia Dawn and our real concerns that the risk to future exports from the lack of, demonstrable antibiotic responsible use or usage data. So they would be a number of different angles that I'm coming at this today. Thanks, Kat.
Thank you. And Jonathan.
Morning, Kat. Thank you. Morning, everybody. And well, I probably just described sort of 4 different roles and answer very sort of swiftly across those 4. So the first thing is I'm coming up to 30 years as a cattle vet in practice. So Bishopston Vets in North Yorkshire. Secondly, I'm been chair of the Animal Health and Welfare Board for England for the last 4 years. I've been on the board, so nearly 8 now. Basically, advising ministers and senior officials on all policy to do with kind of kept animals. Thirdly, I'm chief executive of an agri-tech biotech company looking at developing technologies in the whole area of sustainable food. And finally, I'm professor of sustainable livestock health and welfare at Harp and Keel Vet School. So to pick up your theme, Kat, which as you know is something that I care about, really kind of passionately, I think responsible use of medicines across those 4 areas. First of all, I'm a prescriber. So basically, as a vet in practice, the farmers, animals under my care, medicines are at the heart of really looking for animal health and welfare. So that's the first thing, is crucial. The second bit from a policy perspective is looking at what medicines mean in terms of animal health and welfare policy and One Health and food security and all those aspects around where we interact really with kind of medicines and all those aspects. The third bit is in terms of with RAFT is looking for technologies that actually allow us to innovate, for the UK to innovate and to prevent disease, to have healthier animals is really key. And lastly, from a vet school perspective, is actually looking ahead, the next generation. So education, embedding responsible use in medicines from year 1 for veterinary undergraduates, and also being part of kind of research in looking for really future innovation to actually have responsible use.
Thank you. So let's get into some more of the detail. It's important to acknowledge that there are many factors impacting the responsible use of medicines in livestock. But what is clear is that the UK has been leading the way when it comes to responsible stewardship, and in particular its work to tackle AMR. And this has seen a voluntary 59% reduction in the use of antibiotics over the past decade. This has seen the industry focus efforts to the point that stewardship is now embedded into the daily work of the livestock industry. And whilst the responsible use of medicines is key to helping to protect the efficacy of all medicines and help reduce the prevalence of resistance, there are also other important factors associated with responsible medicine stewardship, be that for trade purposes, consumer confidence, to continue to demonstrate the UK's high health and welfare standards in farming, or to simply ensure good animal health in our enterprises, which helps drive efficiency. All of these are essential factors in making sure that UK farming is viewed as the best, as leading the way, and is recognised as a principal contributor and driving force in the battle against AMR. I think it's fair to say that the UK has real strengths, measurable reductions in antibiotic use and strong industry leadership frameworks and a national AMR action plan. But there is still an ongoing need for coordinated action to sustain responsible medicine use while protecting animal welfare. So let's now talk about the opportunities and challenges influencing responsible use. And I'll come to my first question. Gavin, we always talk about the UK having some of the highest health and welfare standards in the world. Do you feel that this statement is still justified? And does it offer us any opportunities or challenges?
Thanks, Kat. Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And I think there's an awful lot of good practice and that we should be very proud of it across the UK. But I do think it would be perhaps wrong to think that no other countries also have high standards. Ireland, many countries in Europe, many other world third countries, Canada, New Zealand quality lamb. So I think we need to be mindful that we've got a lot of good things, but we're not alone. There's a lot of other countries are on this same path, this same game. I'm going to sort of really focus the rest of this, I think, really on the animal health side and antibiotics, and perhaps look at this from an export perspective, maybe to give a different view of this away from just what's happening at farm level and where this all fits in. Huge volumes of meat and especially offal, is exported from the UK, and that trade's really, really significant for UK farming for now and in the future. And it's that latter bit that I think we're becoming more and more worried about. As a country, as you said, Kat, we think we're good on antibiotics and ruminants, but other countries are catching up. Other countries have caught up, and other countries actually probably are ahead of us. So we say we're good, but in some aspects, some sectors in the ruminant piece, we just can't quite prove it. We can't properly prove it. Some of our other proteins have the data, but in ruminants, we don't yet. Antibiotic use data, I'm sure many people know, it's now a legal requirement in the EU, and it is collected in increasing numbers from other world third countries, for example, Canada, and they're using it to support their trade efforts. So other countries have really grasped it. Exports are really important for them too. It's the success of their livestock and meat and farming industries. If other countries have the data, but we don't, our worry is that potentially going to become a blocker to export? Is that going to be a blocker to trade? If one country has and the other doesn't, commercially that becomes quite a bigger risk as the world evolves. International Meat Secretariat, the Secretary General, many people know, Phil Hadley, absolutely believes that this is a real risk as well. The world is changing, changing in ways that we can't predict. It's very unstable. Increased supplies are coming from all over the world. Eastern Europe, Australia, New Zealand, America, and a lot of it's of excellent quality. Those countries, and others, they are our direct competitors for our meat and our export offal markets. We're in direct competition for that. So we are leading, as Kat said, I think we are leading in lots and lots of ways. But that apparent reluctance at the moment in the ruminant sector for us is proving really worrying. Once those export contracts are lost, if they were to be lost, that's really hard to get them back. If you've lost it, you're struggling. You're not going to get those back easily. And commercially, I keep getting asked, what are we hiding? Why can't we show usage when other people can and more countries can? What are we hiding? We all think we're not, and we're not, but we're not showing it yet. So I think without our exports, the ruminant sector would look incredibly different. If that root of the meat and offal at the end of it is not there, all the rest of it just, that's going to struggle. It wouldn't be there in the same shape it is now. So I think really concluding, Kat, I think just thinking we've got the highest standards just isn't really enough anymore. We've got to be able to show it. So it is a real plea from the export sector that everyone does come behind, we come behind antibiotic use data, and really get on board for it. It's hugely important. Yeah, thanks, Kat. It's really that massive export piece and the health piece and use of antibiotics. I think that's critical for us.
Yeah, and it's turning that kind of that anecdotal understanding that the ruminant sector has always been a traditional low user, but being able to prove it, that's the problem.
I know. I think there's think about it as I'm talking. There's so much within the meat sector is audited to very significant degrees, customers and suppliers that we supply to. The level of audit and scrutiny is high. And if we've got this little hole here where we haven't got this data, it's hard to say to people that yes, it's all right, because they're saying, well, show us, prove it.
Yeah.
So.
And Abby, as the regulator, what's your take on this statement about we have some of the highest health and welfare standards? Where do you think the opportunities and challenges might be with that as the regulator?
Thanks, Kat, and thanks, Gavin, for your take on that as well. I think hopefully that the UK's trade strategy sets out that from a government point of view, there'll be no lowering of food standards, and we will uphold the high animal welfare standards. And we know that high health and welfare standard is really critical for tackling AMR. And as Gavin referred to, we're not the only country in the world who has a high standard, and that's where we want the others to be in order to tackle AMR. From that angle, that's exactly where some of our international work is focused. Kat, you said yourself, although I'm sure you knew I'd probably chuck it into an answer here somewhere, that we've got that 59% reduction in antibiotic use in food-producing animals over since 2014. Might say it again at some point. And we still remain one of the lowest prescribers of antibiotics, and we've achieved some really great reductions in resistance across Europe. So we are in a really good place, but absolutely, Gavin, it's not a case of being at the very top and looking down on others. We want others to be there too. We also know that the recent Public Accounts Committee report highlighted that it's important that we remain having a focus on AMR as a global threat, and that trade agreements in that space don't weaken our resilience to AMR. And as I said, the trade strategy shows that we don't want to lower any standards, and that animal welfare is really important. But I think there is definitely recognition about that methods of production which are not permitted in the UK, and there are concerns about that there are methods that vary in line with different climates and diseases and other contextual reasons, and that there will always be a consideration about whether or not overseas production has an unfair advantage and any impact that may well have. And I know that it's, from a government point of view, there will be, when it's necessary, there will be an ambition to be prepared to use a full range of powers to protect our most sensitive sectors, whatever that may well look like. But in terms of the international work that we're doing and maintaining those high welfare standards, a lot of the work that we've been doing through our national action plan also relates to our international action and providing the support that is needed to bring those standards up globally in the areas where there are maybe at a lower level currently. And that, of course, sits alongside the SPS and AMR cooperation provisions in various trade agreements. In relation to the challenge, which is the question here, I think there's always a challenge to maintain standards, always. Even if we have an ambition to do so, there's always a challenge to do that. But there's also a challenge in relation to driving forward those standards, either in terms of appreciating the environment we're working in, especially where there are multiple influencing factors. And for me, it feels like over the course of the last 5 years, there have been so many factors, many of which we didn't necessarily predict. Some of them have been through political changes, shall I say. Some of them have been through environmental changes. Some of them have been through global geopolitical changes that we're having to factor in. With all of those challenges, though, any leader will tell you there's always an opportunity. And of course there is. An opportunity that, however, can feel challenging, perhaps for me right now, would be our maintaining ambition to improve our relationship with the EU, and maybe through the SPS agreement we can do that. We know that the EU's accepted that there will be a number of areas where we need to retain our own rules, and a lot of that is, of course, subject still to negotiation. But we've been clear about the importance of being able to set high animal welfare standards and support public health and support the use of new and innovative technologies as well in order to maintain that position.
Okay.
Thanks, Kat.
Abby, whilst I've got you, we know how important it is for there to be a reliable access to and supply of all veterinary medicines. But of course, it is expensive to bring new products to market, and the process for licensing is not easy. Is the balance right, and where are the pinch points? And then I think maybe I'll come to Carl after I've heard what you think.
Yeah, thanks, Kat. And hopefully you can see me. I've got a lovely bit of sunshine right in my face. I'm trying to move into the sun rather than the shade, so hopefully you can see me okay there. Yeah, I mean, I I agree, it is absolutely imperative that we have supply and demand that is balanced. And we know absolutely from a problem statement that has come to us through species groups over the course of the last couple of years, in ever increasing number, that balance is not always met. And that's why the VMD recently published our statement of intent, which another word for strategy, I suppose, for vaccine supply. But of course, the principles can be applied to all medicines. But we know the current feeling is that vaccines themselves are a group where that supply and demand balance is currently mismatched. I know we've got a whole other webinar on that, so I won't go into the detail of it all. But it's important that we recognise that where that problem statement exists, the reason for that problem statement. And we've been really clear through some of the communication we've done, either through surveys or through the roundtable, to understand where those pinch points might be. And especially for me as the regulator, if they are regulatory pinch points. We know that the industry, the pharmaceutical industry, is set up to service the EU as a region, and we therefore follow a lot of the international guidelines and data requirements that will help retain the UK as an attractive market for veterinary medicines. So we're doing a lot in the space that we are in now post-Brexit to enable that pharmaceutical industry to still thrive in what has been an ambiguous situation. We also know that some of the challenges are in relation not just to bringing products to market for diseases that we know about, but it's about emerging diseases, it's about novel technologies that we need to consider. How can we make sure that there is a space for innovation, that the UK is open to those innovative vaccine developments specifically, or any other medicine, and especially in a space where, if we think about what the animal health sector looks like now and will look like in the next 5 years, we know, for example, that there'll be more companion animals, there'll be more elderly companion animals, for example. So we just need to understand what that whole animal health sector looks like and where we can position ourselves as the regulator to enable that, so that there are the maximum number of products on the market and that they are available in the supply levels that demand is expecting. I think also from a regulator point of view, hopefully many people will know what our ambition has always been, to put ourselves in a space where we can work more globally with other regulators, to bring applications to the UK at the same time as to others, whether it's through a joint review process with Canada or with Australia and Switzerland. We're working on agreements with the US. It provides lots of opportunity for, particularly for multinational companies, to bring products. I recognise that one of the fundamental differences really between veterinary medicines and human medicines, to which we are very oftenly compared, is the involvement of the NHS. And wouldn't it be wonderful if there was an NHS for animals? But there isn't, and so there isn't that guaranteed purchasing power that the government has on the human side, and we do not have that on the animal side. So understanding where the problems come from, especially those that are within my remit, and I wish all of the problems were within my remit and therefore I could solve them all, but I can't. But I will be in a position to be a conduit to what some of those problem statements are and those pinch points are, so that we can then look at what can be done to address those, because ultimately the ambition is well agreed and understood, and of course at a ministerial level as well, that we want to ensure that we have all the products we need for all of the markets that need them at the right time, which of course then sings to the need for responsible use of products.
Okay. Carl, I'd like your thoughts on this same question, if that's okay.
It's okay. Yeah, maybe worth making a couple of points here. So I think firstly, it's good to understand that very few companies take a solely national look. I think Abby alluded to this when we develop products or our sales. We need to have, nowadays, you need to have multiple larger markets to make it worth the investment. So very few companies will look only at the UK or only at this market or that market. They look at multiple markets when they develop products. Another point which is relevant for people to understand, I think, is that most large animal health product developers, most companies, they develop both livestock and companion animal products. And so there's only so much investment, there's only so many pounds or dollars or euros which can be spent. And so it is fair to say that there is a competition between investment into livestock products or into companion animal products. And that's the reality of the market. And the economic dynamics of those two are very different. Now, about actual cost, I think it's also fair to say that it is costly to develop new products and to get them onto market. But the needed investment, we measure that against potential revenue, obviously. And the higher the costs, the more challenging it is to make the case to invest. So in our sector, it's really important to realize that the highest cost input for us is regulatory requirements, and that's generating data, testing of the products to show efficacy, quality, and safety, and the associated staff which goes with that. So that's the highest cost. Now, as Abby talked about, in the case of the UK, since a couple of years, we have this added complexity of having to apply for licenses separately. Compared to the situation before, and any divergences there in terms of requirements, particularly technical requirements, can I say that I choose that word very carefully, create regulatory complexity, and that does have an adverse impact on decisions on where to invest and the economic viability of our products. So we strongly believe that some sort of agreement, some sort of veterinary medicine agreement should be made between the UK and the EU to facilitate this continued, technical convergence of these products throughout the regulatory process. And in staying, as aligned as possible in that process would ensure, and let me be very clear about this, this will help to ensure long-term availability of medicines. The less discrepancy there is between veterinary regulatory processes and requirements, the easier it is to make the case internally to keep us on markets and to put them on markets. So maybe two other additional points. We like well-resourced regulatory authorities. You have a good one in the VMD, a very good one in the UK. You're lucky. Can't say that for other markets, all other markets. But we would certainly urge you, and I think everybody on this call as well, to realize that and to make sure that the increased public investment that's needed is there. That's a plea. Make sure that you continue to have a good regulator, well-resourced one. That's important. And lastly, I think maybe just completely different point, getting products to market. We've got this AI revolution. There are so many wonderful opportunities, both within our processes internally in companies, but also within the regulatory processes, to look at how, under human guidance, we can use AI to get products to market easier, faster, better, cheaper. So I think there are real opportunities there to get innovations to market. Thanks, Kat.
Thank you. So I suppose really, what we've talked about there is it's a bit around the supply and demand, isn't it? And part of that demand equation is looking at some of the other externalities that's developing as well. So just want to change tack slightly. And I'm looking at Jonathan, I think, first. Jonathan, how do you think the changing climate will affect our approach to medicine use?
Thanks, Kat. There's so much here, isn't there? First of all, let's just think about what new emerging disease threats look like associated with climate change and the environment. We can think about very immediate examples of blue tongue. As we see, climate change brings vectors for disease that couldn't really thrive in our climate, that as that changes potentially can. So we see movement north, east, south, west from existing disease reservoirs, that things move. So I think climate change presents challenges if new emerging pathogens that weren't threats before become threats. And that means, therefore, demand for new vaccine development, for new therapeutics, for new preventative in particular. So I think that's particularly kind of key, isn't it, with things like insect vectors and emerging parasites. I mean, even to the degree that, in the east of the country, I didn't used to see liver fluke 20 years ago, basically in the east of England. And as things have got wetter, and we now see parasite challenges that weren't there are actually now kind of much more widespread. So I think we're going to see globally new emerging disease threats, as well as regionally and locally those changes. Parasites are very particular. Are we going to see kind of tropical, kind of parasite threats that we haven't seen in kind of, northern temperate climates emerge? So they all bring with them needs for new medicines, for innovation to produce both new vaccines, but also new therapeutics. But I think it goes beyond that as well, doesn't it? If we think about what, climate change can mean, whether it's flooding or drought, and in terms of antimicrobial resistance, if we look at what it means for spoilage and basically animals that are exposed to sewage and runoffs because of flooding, means that we get a whole interaction between animal and human and environment that comes with flood challenges. And in the same way, the opposite with drought, where we get heat stress effects on animals, but also on plants. We get different mycotoxin, aflatoxin challenges in drought, kind of ridden crops that have an impact on animals. So I think climate changes bring this really complex set of challenges that all bring with them a demand for innovation around medicines, and they all bring challenges around antimicrobial resistance because they drive animals and humans and environment closer together quite often in that interaction. But I want to also perhaps, Kat, just also flag the massively important role of livestock in food security, in being able to adapt to climate change. Ruminants all around the world are a massive, massive insurance factor. We can move ruminants in particular away from flooded areas to kind of to dry ground, or we can move them away from drought areas towards water. So globally, animals are really, really important in actually adaptation to climate change. So I think we've got to recognise that they've got a really positive role, as well as recognising that farming and animals are part of a global responsibility to reduce, the impact, of both greenhouse gases and warming, but also recognising, biodiversity in terms of pollinators, understanding our responsibilities for that bigger picture of food, the environment, and kind of human and animals means, can we use precision approaches to reduce the impact on the environment in how we use our medicines responsibly? So I think I'll leave it there, Kat, but it's a complex sort of two-way picture, I think, where, farming animals, we've got our share of responsibility for impact to the environment, but we've also got a huge opportunity to continue to adapt, both with medicines innovation, but also for animals to supply food. And actually, the great thing about organic manure fertilizers is what they do for soil, what they do for actually, sequestration opportunities. So livestock have got a really positive role to play actually in being some of the mitigation for climate and environment challenges.
Clara, just coming to your area of expertise, do you think we have the right mechanisms to identify those new emerging diseases and those challenges? And can responsible medicine use adapt and provide industry with the right tools to respond to these challenges?
Thanks, Kat. And just to follow on from what Jonathan was saying, climate change, global heating, and AMR are two global challenges that are absolutely interlinked. In response to your part of the question about do we have the tools to respond, I'll talk about AMR first, and then my more from my side of things from exotic disease control. But in terms of AMR, APHA, there are team of amazing vets and scientists who are working on antimicrobial resistance, and we're part of the UK National Action Plan to confront AMR. And as part of that, there's a cross-government programme called PathSafe, which is about pathogen surveillance in agriculture, food and the environment. And this really focuses on improving the detection and tracking of foodborne human pathogens and associated AMR, from looking at the whole chain from farm to fork. So that's just one example of how we're prepared from the AMR side. And of course, as I said, there's surveillance conducted all the time that is published in the AMR report, and the teams of scientists and vets can respond and support when we find cases of antimicrobial resistance on farms. Moving to the exotic disease side, and as Jonathan has said, we've got an awful lot of exotic diseases sort of stacked up on our doorstep in Europe, and those include these vector-borne diseases. We have been dealing with blue tongue sweeping across the country, lumpy skin disease on the doorstep in France, Italy and Spain, and of course West Nile virus as well. All vector-borne diseases, which through blue tongue we have realised they're really difficult to control from our traditional methods of movement controls or stamping out through culling, and therefore we have to have this we've shifted to the strategy of vaccination being our best control strategy at the moment. And then, of course, we look to Carl and his colleagues to support us to supply the vaccinations and the vaccines and bring those in. Just while we're on vaccines, there can be obstacles for bringing that in. We have trade implications to consider. For example, we're piloting avian influenza vaccination with a small pilot, and as we've seen in France, that can have trade implications. We've got to think about vaccine supply, and then there's also public perception around vaccines shifting and changing that we need to certainly be aware of, possibly respond to. In terms of, do we have the mechanisms to respond to new and emerging diseases? Well, on exotic disease, we work to the contingency plan that really sets out clearly how we detect and respond. We've had a lot of practice recently with responses to avian influenza and blue tongue. It really is a well-oiled machine in terms of that response. And we have expert epidemiologists that I work very closely with in APHA who are tracking disease internationally, leading surveillance programs across the country. And my teams respond to any report cases. Detecting and responding to exotic disease early is really essential, and we have fantastic teams of vets and scientists who do that at APHA. But the National Audit Office report has stated that this is something that we need to work on in terms of our strategic long-term response, how we prepare for the next big one. And the constant response to avian influenza and blue tongue has meant that resources have been focused on that as an agency. The capacity to do both things has been noted by the National Audit Office that the capacity isn't there to do that. So that's something that we're working on as an agency to better focus on. I think also just looking at both exotic and endemic disease, the importance of biosecurity and how we can all work together as a team, really, and that biosecurity can really help with both exotic disease, endemic disease, reduce the disease burden overall, and therefore lead to less reliance and use of antimicrobial medicines. I'll stop there.
Thank you. And just want to open this up a little bit, and I'll ask Gavin afterwards about consumer opinions. But I'm just thinking, I mean, there's you mentioned PathSafe, which I think is a fantastic initiative. You know, and so I would encourage anyone in the audience to go and have a look at, you know, and find out what PathSafe is and read up some of the information about it. But I was just quite keen to understand, maybe coming back to you a bit, Jonathan, with vaccines and certainly with things like blue tongue, we've seen there are mixed messages out there between, you know, farmers and some vets on the ground. Are we doing the right things to try and get those messages out there that vaccines, when they go through all of the licensing process that they've gone through, that they are safe, providing they're used in the right way? Or where do you think we need to kind of slightly improve on that to encourage uptake?
Thanks, Kat. I think, again, sort of building on what sort of Clara said, I think the teamwork aspect of this is absolutely essential. I mean, I'm speaking as a vet in practice as well as kind of, you know, policy role with our Health and Welfare Board. We need to be really well joined up here in getting consistent messaging out. There's some great work that kind of, you know, RUMA and the sort of sector councils have done, you know, from RUMA Health and Welfare Group and Health and Welfare Board with the VMD to get messages out. But actually, this is everyone's responsibility. So this is about government, but also private practice and farmers taking responsibility, that we actually use the evidence which we've got in actually reducing misunderstandings to get a really major team effort. Without working together, we're not going to actually deal with the kind of the whole range of disease threats on our borders that Clara just described. So Kat, we can do more, Kat. I think we can definitely do more in making sure we reinforce at every opportunity. It's every farm visit, it's every discussion. It's using vehicles like the Pathway that are out there in England, where we're actually on farm talking about preventative messages. So I think there's a massive opportunity to do that, because also surveillance is about teamwork. It's about sharing data. It's about basically, you know, making sure we flag those early warning signs and observations. So, you know, every single farmer vet discussion, every opportunity we've got is important here in both messaging about prevention, but also making sure we get the data we need for our overall kind of trade discussions and the early warning alerts. So massive team effort, I think, Kat, is key here.
Okay. And Gavin, you're probably on the panel, you're probably the one that's sitting closest to the consumers as well, and understanding, you know, kind of consumer attitudes around all of this. So I was just wondering, do you think consumers understand what we're doing, and, you know, kind of the way that we farm, and, you know, the fundamental role that, you know, responsible use make?
It's quite a question, really, to be honest. It really is. I think the perception is yes, but there's interesting things. For instance, the recent big euthanasia and welfare issues on farm that were all over the press really didn't do any damage to pork sales. So there is a piece within the public about how they view many of the aspects around animal welfare, animal health, production, antibiotics, etc. There are very, very vocal anti-meat groups out there, which most of us have sort of been exposed to, very much against meat, very much against intensive farming. And I think that's always an interesting one, you know, the definition around intensive farming. You know, intensive farming should and can and should allow for, you know, significant positives rather than it being an implied negative. You know, you put good resources in for biosecurity, housing, feed, genetics, vaccine programs, you do everything that's right, you know, focus together, that should ensure best animal welfare and best animal health at scale. And therefore hopefully associated with a low antibiotic use, you know, to go along with that. I don't think that message perhaps is shouted about, or perhaps not explained that well. possibly because every now and again there's a little bump in the road that comes up and that grabs the press, and all the other good work perhaps gets, not forgotten about, but it's harder to show it again. So, I think big, is not by default bad. That shouldn't be the case. It should be good. It can be very good, can be very efficient. I think maybe that does need messaging more. I think it's been really interesting with the response to Clarkson's farm. So many people are talking about it and continue to talk about it. It's like, oh, we never knew, that happened in farming, and it's been received in a very positive way. I think, it's done a really good thing. Something like that maybe shows a little bit more of intensive farming, bigger scale farming, and actually tries to show all those things I mentioned before, the efficiencies that can go in to make this can make it a very high quality thing. I think there was a thought somewhere around about perhaps should consumers perhaps be more aware of some of the legislation, or perhaps particularly the veterinary medicines regulations. But I have to be honest, and it's probably been this way for a long time. An awful lot of surveys show with consumers for retailers and food service, actually the significant trust by consumers is actually directly with their retailer and their food service companies. They trust them. The surveys keep coming back, and that level of trust is very, very high. They are, they're trusted to do it right. So I think that's an interesting way for us then maybe to think about is well, okay, if that consumer trust is there, how do we all put that bit to make sure that those retailers and food services have all the tools, the information, data that they need to be able to keep doing the things that they do and keep the consumer, trusting what they do. So I think, extending that, most retailers and food service are all members of FIIA, Food Industry Initiative on Antimicrobials. They operate to, a collective position and purpose on policy supporting, responsible use of antibiotics. And those members have been really aligned. They have been very aligned, and to a pretty good extent been very non-competitive. It's been a very positive environment. They all want the same thing. But that lack of ruminant usage data now is sort of putting that at risk. Retailers genuinely say about where the pressure comes in the system. It is consumers, but a lot of the retailers are under pressure from, external sources, and shareholder pressure, etc., on their boards to be able to demonstrate and show that they are doing animal health and welfare properly, including antimicrobial usage. So it'd be a real missed opportunity, I think, for the sector that we're really talking about, or I am really for the ruminant bit at the moment, to risk missing, not helping that joined up approach. If we miss that, it's going to look different, because the retailers are in that position now of going, we need this data now. We've gone along for quite a long time, staying together, being a non-competitive, joined up voice, but the risk is, they're under significant business pressure, and they could easily go off and do different things. So I think that's just critical that, that is supported, that in that supply chain, that the retailers and the food service are such a massive, user of meat, milk, supply chain products from the farming sector, and then you put export on that as well. There's two huge areas that are really needing and wanting this information, and they want to show the positives. So yeah, I think that there is consumer pressure. It's nuanced sometimes. I think sometimes when price comes in, it's a natural thing. Financial difficulties, people perhaps don't push some of the aspects so much, but I think people are aware of it. But I think we as a sector entirely could genuinely show that there's a lot more good stuff.
Abby, I was thinking the other day about the evolution that RUMA went through from when I first got involved with it back in 2006, whenever it was, to where we are now. And part of that evolution, back in 2014, I think it was, where we started being a lot more focusing in on our targets, looking at our, at the way that RUMA worked, the way we pulled the industry together, the way that we worked a lot closer and collaboratively with, with the likes of the VMD, FSA, all like that. A lot of that was in response to some of the pressure that we were getting from retailers, from MPs, from MEPs in Europe as well. As the regulator, Abby, do you think that we've done the right thing, and is there more that we need to keep doing, or are we just doing, do we keep doing what we're doing to continue getting and gaining the confidence of you as the regulator in our responsible use principles?
Thanks, Kat. I mean, I personally value collaboration. I think the VMD now champions collaboration as a regulator, which is actually maybe a little bit unique, as others tell me, although I feel that it is a way of working that is really important. And I think the increased knowledge of each partner, stakeholder, customer, whatever we might want to call ourselves, to each other, knowledge of our feeling on something, our ambition on something, our ability to deliver a thing, especially when that thing is in an agreed vision for what the future should look like, is really important. And I don't think that we can ever stop wanting to collaborate. I don't think we ever should stop collaborating. And the more we know about what each other is doing and the challenges, and I don't want to talk about the vaccine strategy too much because I know we've got another session on that, but that has been a really good example of where we've led on understanding what those pinch points are. Where are the issues? Because if there is something then that we can understand from each sector's point of view, we can then address that. I think that also the value of having those open conversations and working collaboratively is that we can see where there is ambition, and we can see where there has been really great progress, and we know how much advance we have made over the last 10 or 12 years. So absolutely, I think that there is a space to continue working in the way that we have. And as we do so, we will have a greater understanding of what can be delivered, what has been delivered, but what also some of those challenges that we've got ahead of us look like.
And then, Carl, can I just basically to kind of take us around the globe a little bit, and broaden it out, kind of European consumers. What's your perception, and kind of what do you see internationally? Do you think that the UK is a more sensitive approach to how we treat animals? Are we working along the same principles, doing things slightly differently? What's your take?
I think the UK is working on the same principles. I think and God, it's a pity this is being taped, because I'll be on record now saying something I probably regret now. I think you have a slightly overexcited media environment. Can I say it that way? Which makes that cool, calm, scientific decision-making is sometimes a little bit challenged. Thankfully, happily, I think in the UK, there is cool, calm, and scientific-based decision-making, but it is under pressure. But that's a threat, that decisions should not be made under, the threat of some sort of media article or frenzy or whatever it is. So that's one difference I definitely see. I don't see the frenzies the same way in other places. I also think that in other markets there is a much greater acceptance of the wider livestock community's role, the whole ecosystem. I don't think they feel as under threat in many other countries as I think they sometimes feel in the UK. That might have something to do with the first point. I'm not sure. But I do feel that there is certainly consumer pressure to produce more sustainably. That pressure is there. All of the accounts, however, show that, and all reports and forward-looking visions show that, meat and milk consumption is not going to dramatically decrease. It's going to stay stable in Western European economies, and it's going to increase quite dramatically in other markets. So I think that is the reality we live in, and the only significant question then that remains is, how do we do that in a way which is respecting of animal welfare, respecting of the more environmental, more sustainable, and magic, better animal health. There you go. That's the solution. Better animal health, better animal welfare are the motors, I think, or the enablers of efficient and cleaner production. And we've seen that in AMR, and we'll see that in every other thing. And prevention, but I'll come to prevention at the end, Kat.
Okay. Just changing tack then slightly again, and I'll probably come to Jonathan again on this one. Do you think there are opportunities to achieve more improvements in housing, nutrition, biosecurity to support our responsible use of medicines without compromising productivity?
It's a good question. I think look, there's massive win-win opportunities here. I mean, disease is waste. Disease is waste in terms of food production, in terms of productivity of our farming industries. It's a hit on profitability. Farming sector is under an ever circulating round of pressures with the geopolitical aspects we talked around already, let alone uncertainties in terms of what climate change is bringing. So disease is waste. Disease is preventable opportunities, for actually saving the costs that go together with actually losses to do with disease impact. So I think the challenge is always about investments, because infrastructure and preventative medicines can often feel like insurance investments, where an immediate disease threat in front of you triggers a response, triggers treatment and therapy, but that's often after significant losses have occurred. So I think the win-win here, Kat, is absolutely around good nutrition supports good immunity, with our kind of kept, animals. It's so important in terms of making sure we've got resilience to disease from our kind of, herds and flocks. In the same way, good housing and management provides an environment where clean air, good drainage and good hygiene reduce the threat of disease. Good biosecurity in both global trading practices in terms of those exotic threats that Clara talked about, but also everyone's farm boundary, what we can do in terms of purchase stock, in terms of our gateways, in terms of our fences, we can keep disease out. They all reduce the waste of disease. But the things that we can also do is that we can invest in vaccines and preventative medicines. And by doing that in a farm-specific way, by doing that in a way where we are prioritizing those investments at farm level, that we are making sure that we're picking the right investments to make for each farm, we're going to reduce that productivity hit and make sure there's the best return on those medicine investments, but also those boundary, purchase stock and nutrition investments that are important. So I think it's a win-win here, Kat. I think there really is, that by doing those things that improve resilience to disease, they actually enhance productivity. And part of that is definitely using the vaccines which reduce not just exotic disease threats, but those key endemic diseases that really rob us of productivity. And I'm going to pick the obvious one in terms of BVD and cattle, because it's the one I'm kind of closest to. But we've got an immunosuppressive disease, which basically opens up animals to, lots and lots of other more severe diseases. And until we've got rid of that, we're carrying a millstone around that makes everything else harder. And when we've got programs like the Animal Health and Welfare Pathway that are actually funding farmer and vet specific planning, then actually we've got a lot of the tools here to put those win-wins into place. So I think farm specific, herd health, flock health planning, using structures like the pathway in England, but also great programs in Scotland, in Wales and Ireland, we can do these things in a way that actually enhance productivity and protect profitability, because the waste of disease is the biggest cost in this, I think.
And Gav, I'm just going to come to you. I was very struck by Jonathan with his disease is waste. I think it's a really nice little soundbite. And, kind of from your side, obviously, when you start and talk about waste, you start and think about kind of profitability, productivity, food security. So I just wanted to bring you in for your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think, a lot of that will come back in, if they're endemic disease, particularly parasitic diseases, you're looking at effects on livers, etc., when they come in to slaughter, and that's potentially just completely wasted product and food. It'll go as a byproduct. It can obviously lose value. It's not going into the human food chain for domestic or export. So I think the other factor that for me fits with this as well, which again is a big opportunity, and it really links into if you've got healthy animals and disease is waste, as Jonathan said, those animals are going to grow more quickly. They're going to finish faster. So their sort of gas emission footprint, however we want to measure it, is going to be much lower. So you've got that additional win, as well as not using antimicrobials. You've got a growth win, and you've got an environmental win at the same time. So it's just that natural thing. It all comes together. You've got a better finished product coming into slaughter, healthier animal, less waste at the abattoir, and faster to finish. So it's all good. It's very positive.
And then Clara, just to bring you into this as well a little bit. What opportunities do we have from surveillance? Are we making the best use of the surveillance potential in the UK? To try and kind of deal with productivity, profitability, food security, animal health and welfare.
So I just want to reflect on my time many years ago as a farm vet in the southwest, because we really are, with surveillance, we're so dependent on all of those vets and keepers of animals and farmers out there to work together, and to the boots on the ground, the eyes and ears for all of us to be picking up on any signs or signals of disease, whether that be exotic notifiable disease report case that they'll phone in very quickly, or a vet working with a farmer on insidious disease, might be BVD, that can then work with local APHA colleagues, take it to the veterinary investigation centre. You can work with, we've got species expert groups who work with vets to really try to discover what's happening and tackle that. So all of that information is so valuable, as well as the sort of surveillance programs that we put in place. As I've said, for AMR, one of those is that constant monitoring in healthy and diseased animals. But I think all of that information gathering from across the country really is so important. And as I said, working with international partners to understand what other countries are experiencing and how they're responding to those, because we're only as strong as our weakest animal health system. I'm pretty proud of the animal health system that we have here, as collectively as private vets as APHA, but as Abby was saying, the importance of working with international partners to support strengthening of their animal health systems as well. We might be an island, but really we're so reliant on others beyond these shores as well. Just coming back to the animal health and welfare pathway, if I may, Jonathan highlighted this. It's a really amazing initiative. I'm not leading on it, so I don't know the details, but when I was in practice, I worked, there was a precursor, the Southwest Healthy Livestock Initiative, which was similar in that it funded vet visits and to farms, and the time I spent that the farm wasn't paying for, so there wasn't the pressure on the farm going through, I think we were focusing on yonis, some of the visits were on mastitis, but it gave us the time together to walk around the farm, really think about the issues at the farm boundary, but within biosecurity within different parts of the farm, and then think about adaptations that worked for that particular farm, because it's not a cookie cutter approach. You need to, people will need to think about what works for them, but being almost given that time to have that conversation was so valuable. So I'd highlight what Jonathan said about every conversation having so much value to really improve animal health and welfare.
Kat, could I add something to that?
Yeah, of course.
Just from my global perspective, I mean, and going to the question about, improvements in housing and nutrition and biosecurity and all of those types of investments that are necessary or desirable, I should say. I would, just from a global perspective, make the point that if I compare the UK to other countries, I do see a lot of, dare I say, more sympathy and investment in other countries for the wider livestock ecosystem, and I think that takes the form, at least from the government side, in all kinds. It takes different forms, like trying to open up export markets, being very, very proactive in trying to open up export markets. Some countries are very good at that, or putting in place vaccination policies which are very predictable, so that farmers know what's coming, or even co-funding vaccination. I mean, your Gaelic cousins co-fund vaccination. I'm not sure what the case is in the UK, but those are very proactive, almost policies facilitating on-farm investment flows, tax breaks, recognition, much wider kind of societal recognition of societal value of farming and livestock. These are things which I think really are opportunities also in the UK to support the wider livestock community, which plays not just a role in, I mean, I think you said it, Jonathan, food supply, but in a whole bunch of other areas, societal values, and community, rural development, all kinds of things. I think we need to look at that full wide package of things in that way. Sorry, I had to interject there, Kat.
No, it was a very, very useful interjection, Carl. So yes, and I think I think this is where the frustration comes in, doesn't it? Historically, we've been very good at going into silos and trying to find solutions in silos. And actually, a lot of what we're talking about and a lot of what we're thinking, it's about opening up those silos completely and trying to look at the whole picture and seeing. So it's not really, an aspect being somebody's individual responsibility. It's that shared responsibility, isn't it? And that's farmers, vets on the ground, government bodies, regulators, parliamentary decisions, whatever. It should all be taken out of the silos and looked at in the whole, I think. Okay, I'm going to move on and change tangent a little bit again. And I think I'm going to just basically open this up and ask any of you for an opinion. So, do you see any challenges to our responsible use of medicines from greater awareness or interest on the environmental footprint from that medicine use? because I think that's something that's really important. I might come on to Carl first, but then I invite the rest of you to just wave at me if you don't volunteer. So Carl, you first.
Yeah, I'll keep it to the point. It's obvious that there is a lot more interest in environmental impact of farming. And I think, Gavin, you said it very clearly, or maybe it was you, Jonathan. The more efficient we can do this, the healthier we keep the animals, the more productivity we have. Now, that's from a macro point of view, that's a very easy argument. From a micro point of view, it's a difficult argument for some people to comprehend. And I think a lot more effort needs to be made from everybody to get that point across. So, and there's all kinds of aspects to it. You know, antimicrobials is one, but you know, vaccine, genetics, there's all kinds of stuff I won't go into now. We don't have time to go into now, but it's obvious that as a whole, the wider global and UK livestock community needs to do better. The tools are there. It's using these tools in a more efficient manner. Jonathan, you talked about a couple of diseases where you could, you know, if you treated those or prevented those, then you could have a great impact. So I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, can I come this coming? I think following on from what Carl's saying, and there's a couple of thoughts really. I think the first thing is the environmental footprint means lots of different things. You know, we talked about, you know, the broad aspects of impacts, interactions that are warming, they are, you know, biodiversity, their land use change, their water, you know. So I think we just need to be quite clear about actually what environmental sort of impacts and footprints mean. So the first thing is that, you know, the diseases waste aspect is never truer, as Gavin talked about, in terms of efficiencies of production. You know, if we can improve what daily live weight gain is, you know, mobilizing the immune system to fight disease burns megajoules, you know, it reduces basically efficiencies of production. It therefore reduces how much food we actually kind of are able to produce on farm per, you know, ton of carbon. So there's actually a very, very clear benefit where we can just trade off the return on investment for the environment by actually better health. So I think that's really, really clear. We've got good numbers on that. We've got good metrics. The evidence is incredibly strong. I think it can be harder if we've got aspects of residues that might impact, you know, both our water quality, soil quality, and hit biodiversity. And I think responsible use is, in my view, very much about precision then. You know, can we make better use of diagnostics so that we're using the right products at the right times for the right farm? And can we use things in a more precise way? You know, reduce blanket use. We moved away from prophylactic use of antimicrobials to much more targeted use. And I think that applies to things like, you know, wormers and lots of other parasiticides, where if we've got precision use, we really will reduce a lot of the impact on the environment. But we've got to remember animal welfare is really important. And therefore, you know, this is about using as little as we can, you know, as we need, as little as we can, but as much as we need. And I think that's really important to recognise. So precision is, I think, important in managing residue risks and managing those wider things. We need the products, but we should use them in a precise way.
Thank you. Abby, yes, please come in.
Yeah, thanks, Kat. I mean, I just want to say, I mean, I know you all know this, but just for the record, obviously, over the years that we undertake our assessments of medicine applications, of course, what we conduct as part of that robust benefit risk analysis is a risk assessment of the environmental impact, and especially in medicines that are destined for livestock, for the food producing species. That goes through 2 phases of environmental considerations, and when there has been a risk that's been identified, those environmental warnings obviously and mitigation measures are included in the packaging on the leaflet and label. But I do recognise that there is an increased interest in environmental factors, and it's not a new thing that we're suddenly looking at, but has been there for quite some time. The VMD established, I can't remember when now, but over a year ago the Pharmaceuticals and the Environment Group, which brings together across government, actually, and across sectors, folk who will have an interest in looking at where there are residues in the environment and what impact that could have. The angle that Jonathan was just referring to is really important, that we don't go down the route of saying environmental impacts are so severe that we should stop using products. That's not what we're saying. The animal health and welfare aspect of it is really important. Currently, the Pharmaceuticals and Environment PI group is focusing on small animal medicines. That's where there had been the most concern, but obviously the future activities could go beyond that. The other thing I just wanted to say on the AMR angle is, obviously, it's really important that we think about those environmental dimensions, because that's why we take that One Health approach. That is the National Action Plan. It is One Health. We know that resistant bacteria can spread from animals to people and people to animals and through the environment. And I think an increased understanding of that, through an interest perhaps in the environmental impacts, is really of benefit to us to enable responsible use, enable limited impact on the environment, but to protect animal health and welfare.
Okay, thank you. Now we've got one more question to put to you, and again, I'd like time for all of you to come in on that one. Just so before we come on to that question, I just want to remind people to sign up to the rest of the webinars. I think there will be a booking link will shortly be posted on the Q&A to this, but I just wanted to remind people to please sign up and register for the later webinars. And as I said before, all webinars will be available to rewatch on our website in the near future. So my final question to all of you, and you've been a great panel so far, so don't let me down, come up with some good answers. What single change would have the biggest long-term impact on keeping medicines effective for both animals and people? And Gavin, I'm going to come to you, please.
I think it might be interesting to look at, I think it's from the point that many farmers are very engaged with this, and lots of people in the chain are, but potentially others maybe perhaps just don't necessarily know what they don't know. Put it that way, there's a lot of information in and around this whole topic. So I just wonder whether some form of perhaps a national animal health and welfare responsible use training program could possibly have quite a significant benefit. Bring everybody up to a level of knowledge on this topic. How that would be delivered, possible mechanisms, but yeah, I'd just be interested to explore that, to see that there was a program that everyone who farmed livestock had to do, in whatever shape that took.
Okay, interesting concept.
You asked for something different.
I did. Yes, I did. Clara, I'll go with you next.
Just in case.
Thank you. I really think that focus on disease prevention is the first step, through improved biosecurity, vaccination, surveillance, but really doing that through teamwork, to whether that's to prevent and respond to exotic notifiable disease, or really working closely with your vet on tackling endemic disease. And APHA is a really integral part of that team. It might be locally getting to know your local vet investigation centre or APHA vet, or international partnerships, really learning from each other and how we tackle that. But I'd really want to focus on prevention.
Okay, and I'll come to Abby, I think, next to answer, please.
Thanks, Kat. I was trying to think of something really dramatic, but unfortunately, rather boringly, I think I'd follow on very succinctly from what Clara was saying, because I think there's not necessarily a single change. I think there's an enhancement and a continuation of what we're currently doing, and maybe the theme that we've talked about today around collaboration, around the importance of having really great surveillance, about having really great data that helps inform us whether or not the medicines that are currently being used are effective, and if not, what can we do about that? That will help increase that ambition to have safe and effective medicines available. But as I've said before, working together to understand what the pinch points would be, and that is through that collaboration, and we've already put that in train. So I suppose a change would be increasing the number of people who are working in that space and thinking in that collaborative way and bringing everybody along on that journey. I think there's probably some little bits of innovation we can do around surveillance and stewardship that may well help very specifically, but I think overall data and people is really key.
Okay. And who wants to go next?
I'll go.
Thanks, Carl.
So you asked, Kat, what single change would have the biggest long-term impact. So I'm going to give you two answers.
Okay.
The negative one is a massive preventable outbreak of something which would really, really negative. And you guys have gone through it in the UK already. I won't remind you of the disease. But that led to the most changes in I think in livestock keeping and stuff for 20 or 30 years. So unfortunately, it's an outbreak, I think, of something which it was preventable. And now let me get to the positive one, which is building on what I think everybody has said right now, is to prepare for that and to prevent that. And what is needed for that is a quite fundamental mind shift change toward prevention. And when I say fundamental, I mean through government, through consumer, through farmer, through the entire chain, really beginning to think much harder and act much faster on prevention and putting in place what prevention actually is. So that you don't have one of those horrible outbreaks which you had. So a fundamental mind shift change toward prevention is what I would say.
Okay. Jonathan.
So I think there's lots of good stuff there. I'm not sure going last is a good idea when there's been lots of kind of good ideas, but I think what I honestly think the single change that have the biggest long-term impact, it draws together a lot of those other answers, so forgive me therefore sort of taking from them, but I honestly think it will be a new normal in working together effectively, because there's a lot of sound bites, but actually turning words into a new structure, a new collaborative way of working. And by that, I mean definitely industry and government. So that's farmers, vets, pharmaceutical industry, government, actually genuinely finding new ways to work together to prevent those sort of outbreaks that Carl talked about. And also recognizing really what that needs to do. So a new normal, okay, basically how we do those things together. And I'm going to just if I can, just pick two kind of examples. So one is definitely that prevention is better than cure piece. I couldn't agree more. That is effective herd health. The animal health and welfare strategy came out of 2001 foot and mouth outbreak, and we forget the lessons of that at our peril. The Public Accounts Committee report are really going back to that discussion. But the other thing for me, the new normal working together, is actually turning the One Health soundbite into something that's real. You know, One Health is about human, animal, and environment interactions in a balanced way, not one-sided health. And I think if we look at the way that veterinary medicines hasn't interacted effectively with billions of pounds of investment in life sciences, in the way that we have a separate conversation about the environment from we do about pandemic preparedness, I think the new normal for me has got to be about finding ways to have human health, prosperity, animal health, welfare, food production, and the environment working together in a really functionally effective way.
Okay, thank you. Well, look, thank you so much. That's me got to the end of my questions. I think it's been a really great discussion. Thank you as a panel. You've been absolutely brilliant. And you know, kind of, I hope everyone in the audience has really enjoyed it. I'll just remind you again, we've got 3 more webinars coming up on consecutive Wednesdays in November. So we've got Future for Vaccine Availability for the UK animal health market next Wednesday, same time, it's starting at 11 o'clock. Then we've got the RUMA TTF2 final report and the VMD's VARS report launch on Wednesday the 19th, starting again 11 o'clock, going on till 12:30. And then the final webinar is the RUMA TTF3 launch, and that's looking at the unveiling of the 3rd cycle sector targets. That's Wednesday the 26th of November, again 11 o'clock to 12:30. I don't think you've actually been able to see the Q&A section as the audience, but all of the registration details are on the RUMA website. So please do go and register. And at that, I will thank you all very much, both as a panel and as the audience, for giving us some time and actually kind of getting involved today. And I think at that, I will call the meeting to a close. Thank you all.